This week on Jerusalem Dateline, scrapping the nuclear agreement with Iran. President Trump says it's time to fix a very bad deal. Plus, the Kurds under threat. Why isn't the world standing up for this fledgling democracy? And celebrating the Feast of Israel. Thousands of Christians show their love and support for the Jewish nation. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. President Trump calls it the worst deal America has ever negotiated. Now he's declaring that parts of the Iran nuclear deal aren't in the national security interests of the United States. And he's turning it over to Congress to make changes, including mending the trigger points for placing sanctions on Iran and creating new and tougher sanctions. Gary Lane has the story.
The president has until Sunday to notify Congress about Iranian compliance with the nuclear deal negotiated back in 2015.
Last year, candidate Donald Trump campaigned against the Iranian agreement. And now, 9 months into his presidency, he's expected to announce that while the Iranians are technically complying, the agreement itself is not in the national security interest of the United States.
And that means he could ask Congress to revise some of the details of the deal. He's reportedly opposed to the requirement that Iran's compliance with the deal must be certified every 90 days. The president believes that's nearly impossible to do when Iran doesn't allow inspections of its military bases. They're suspected of housing illicit nuclear development facilities. Appearing on the Sean Hannity Show Wednesday night, the president again said it's the worst deal America has ever negotiated.
It's a very bad deal. I'm not saying anything different tonight that I have been saying for 2 years. Yeah. It's a horrible, horrible embarrassment to our country. And we did it out of weakness when actually we had great strength.
The president opposes a sunset clause in the nuclear agreement, which allows Iran to ramp up its nuclear enrichment capabilities after 10 years. And he believes the agreement with Iran should have been tied to other Iranian actions, including developing and testing ballistic missiles and supporting the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Iranian President Rouhani says he won't change the deal, calling the nuclear agreement irreversible. And President Trump also has another growing nuclear threat to deal with. North Korea's foreign minister told Russian journalists that President Trump has, quote, lit the fuse of war with his country over its nuclear program. The U.S. has imposed tough sanctions on North Korea and is keeping up its military maneuvers in the region, including a joint U.S.-South Korea show of force as B-1 bombers and fighter jets flew over the Korean peninsula.
Also on Wednesday, the president announced his new pick for Homeland Security Secretary. She's Kirstjen Nielsen, an expert in the key area of cybersecurity and top aide to former Homeland Security Chief and now White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. Gary Lane, CBN News.
The nuclear deal with Iran is one menace in the region, but Iran's presence is also growing within Iraq and along the borders of the Kurdish regional government. It could be the next flashpoint in the Middle East. After the Kurdish people voted for independence last month, Turkish and Iraqi troops held a joint exercise on the Kurdish border. The exercise was designed to threaten the Kurdish regional government. Turkish President Recep Erdogan made that clear.
The Kurdistan regional government has in fact thrown itself into the middle of the fire with its senseless attempt at independence. I don't accept anyone's independence.
But it's not just Turkey the Kurds are worried about. One of the biggest concerns of the Kurdish people after the referendum is the presence of Shiite militias on their borders, called the PMF, or Popular Mobilization Forces, and the growing influence of Iran. CBN News got a rare look at these militias on the front lines between Kurdistan and Iraq. We're coming up to an Iraqi checkpoint right now, and this kind of sets the scene for the conflict, or potential conflict. We just left a Kurdish checkpoint about a kilometer behind us, and we're going to an Iraqi checkpoint. And the main thing about this is it's manned by what's called the PMU, Popular Mobilization Units. These are Shiite militias, and this could set the stage for a possible conflict in the near future. We saw this growing Iranian influence throughout the area, from Shiite flags flying at checkpoints, the main street of the Christian village of Bartella, this poster with a picture of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the headquarters of a major Shiite militia leader.
The fact that his militia appears to have a presence of some kind in Bartella is not good. It's not good from anybody's point of view.
Middle East analyst Jonathan Spire warns the presence of Shiite militias does not bode well for the region.
We should be aware of the fact that the Hashd al-Sha'bi, the Shia militias serving Iran on Iraqi soil, are themselves a manifestation of political Islam, in some ways no less heinous and no less dangerous than the manifestation which we're witnessing the destruction of, so to speak, around us now.
President Trump is holding off on moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The White House insists the decision does not represent a weakening of support for Israel. Trump said he first wants to try for an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. However, U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman says he will continue to push for an embassy move and said that the time has come for everyone to realize that there's no chance of Israel and the Palestinians reaching an agreement at this time. In the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump pledged to make moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem a priority. Israel announced it would withdraw from an influential UN body just hours after the U.S. said it's pulling out because of its policies affecting Israel. The State Department says UNESCO, the United Nations Scientific and Cultural Organization, displays a continuing anti-Israel bias. In May, UNESCO passed a resolution on Israel's Independence Day that rejected any legal or historic claims by Israel to the city of Jerusalem. In July, it declared Hebron, the city where Jewish patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried, as a Palestinian World Heritage Site. The U.S. said UNESCO is in need of, quote, fundamental reform. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directed Israel's foreign ministry to prepare Israel's pullout in parallel with the U.S. He called the American move a brave and moral decision, saying UNESCO had become a theater of the absurd because it distorted history rather than preserving it. Palestinian rivals Hamas and Fatah announced a preliminary agreement ending a decade-old conflict. Egypt sponsored the negotiations, and if the new agreement goes through, Gaza could be returned to the control of the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. It could also mean Egypt will open its border crossing with Gaza, possibly allowing more weapons into the territory. 2 years after Israel left Gaza in 2005, Hamas and Fatah fought a pitched battle in the streets before Hamas gained control of the territory. Since then, Hamas has fired rockets on southern Israel and used tunnels for terrorist raids, prompting Israel to fight 3 wars with the terrorist group. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he opposes any deal that doesn't require Hamas to recognize Israel and stop its militant activities. Up next, ISIS is defeated, Mosul begins to rebuild, and the Kurds are seeking independence. After years of war, change is coming to northern Iraq. Since the defeat of ISIS in northern Iraq, changes are happening rapidly. The people of Kurdistan passed a resolution for independence, but the presence of Shiite militias and Iran could pose the next threat to peace in the region. In the heart of western Mosul, devastated by the battle to defeat ISIS, we spoke with Middle East analyst Jonathan Spire about these changes and what they mean for the region and the world. Jonathan, we've been in many places in Jerusalem, but the first time here in Iraq, right in the center of Mosul. What's your reaction being here?
Well, this is not my first time in Mosul. I was here in April at the time when the Iraqi forces had just reached the Tigris River and western Mosul still remained to be conquered. Looking round, of course, what we're looking at is the action that took place since then, as ISIS was driven back all the way to the Al-Nuri Mosque, where Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared the so-called and now defunct caliphate back in June 2014. That's just about 200 meters in that direction to our right is where the remains of the Al-Nuri Mosque is. So my thoughts are really what we're looking at here, this devastation that we can see around us, is the price that it took to destroy that most vile of projects that was declared in this city in June 2014, calling itself the Islamic State. This is the cost, this is the price, this destruction is what it took to turn that thing, you know, from a reality back into just an idea again.
What do you think about the future, not only for Mosul, but this part of Iraq?
Well, my sense, unfortunately, Chris, is that, yeah, the Islamic State is now, of course, dying and will be destroyed. Unfortunately, its demise will not solve, I think, many of the core problems that caused it to come into being. That is to say, the sectarian nature of Iraqi life, the sharp divisions, deep divisions between Shia Arab Iraqis and Sunni Arab Iraqis, the fact that the country is now dominated by the Shia, and the largely Sunni population of Mosul, when it comes back, I'm afraid, will be no more satisfied than it was when it welcomed, and it largely did welcome, ISIS into the city back in the summer of 2014. The core issues remain unresolved, and there unfortunately are no signs that they're about to be resolved. We've been witnessing today the presence of the Shia, the Iran-supported Shia militias right here in Mosul city, Iran-supported sectarian forces. They're not going to be the ones that are going to be able to bring a better future to Iraq, but they represent the power right now in this country, unfortunately.
We're after the Kurdish referendum for independence. What's your sense what's next after the referendum?
Well, my sense is that the Kurds mean to go full speed ahead. That's certainly been my impression from the conversations I've had with Kurdish officials. And the sense is that the Kurds mean to turn that into a momentum and to move towards practical negotiations towards independence as soon as possible. What we're witnessing, of course, is a very sharp reaction to that from Baghdad. And my sense from the Kurdish side, though, is they feel they've got sort of wind in their sails right now, and they mean to push forward towards independence. Frankly, what they want is out of the system that produced all this destruction. They don't want to be part of Iraq anymore. They want to have a chance to build their own country.
Mm-hmm. What about the U.S.? What role does that have in a post-referendum Kurdish referendum?
I think the U.S. has a huge role. That's to say, much will depend on the stance that the United States now chooses to take. The United States, of course, was opposed to the referendum, controversially. Many people felt that after the service that the Kurds had rendered, in a way, humanity in fighting and defeating ISIS in the plains of northern Iraq, they perhaps deserved their chance at a political future of their own. The U.S. was dead set against it. What much will depend now on how the U.S. will respond to the Iraqi attempt to take a hard line against the Kurdish move towards independence. If the United States offers some form of tacit support towards the Kurds, it can be full speed ahead. If not, then I'm afraid things can get pretty tough around here again in the years ahead.
We were in Bartella and we saw a lot of Shiite militia, and we saw one particular Shiite militia that you thought was quite significant. What does that mean, and what's the future of Christians near?
Well, the militia we saw was the Badr organization. We saw a poster of its leader, Hadi al-Amiri. This is a very senior pro-Iranian Shia operative here in Iraq, and the fact that his militia appears to have a presence of some kind in Bartella is not good. It's not good from anybody's point of view, but I suspect it's also particularly not good from the point of view of Christians in that traditionally Christian town. We were hearing today from Christians in Bartella the presence of an increasingly aggressive Shia population around the town, and the sense that they no longer feel welcome, they no longer feel able to live their lives peacefully as they once did.
Anything you'd like to add, Jonathan?
Not really, just to reiterate once again, I think when we look at the destruction around here, what we see is the price it took to defeat ISIS, and we shouldn't forget who it was that defeated ISIS. Certainly also the Shia militias played their role. We need to, give them recognition for that. But also we should remember the role played by the Kurdish fighters, vital, not in the city itself, but in pushing ISIS back towards the city. And when they sort of come to the West and say, well, we did something for humanity and we want something in return, I think we should be prepared to listen to that.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. Great to be with you, even in a place like here in the middle of Mosul, devastated as it is. Thank you.
Likewise, Chris. Thanks very much.
Coming up, thousands of Christians show their love for Israel by coming here to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. This year, festival goers are getting a special treat, the screening of a new documentary about the unification of Jerusalem on the 50th anniversary. Anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world. Yet with so many against the Jewish state, one group of people is making a point to show their solidarity. Thousands of Christians came to Jerusalem this year to celebrate the biblical Feast of Tabernacles and stand with Israel. They came from the ends of the earth for the six-day celebration.
It's the invitation of Zechariah the prophet in chapter 14, verse 16 of the book of Zechariah. He envisions a time when all the nations will come up, celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, worship the Lord here, and we're like forerunners.
More than 5,000 Christians from nearly 100 nations came here on opening night to proudly stand with Israel and celebrate the biblical Feast of Tabernacles.
In the end of the day, it's God's faithfulness that has established for almost 40 years now this international gathering of the body of Christ in a unique way that you can't find anywhere else.
The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem sponsors the celebration. The organization started in 1980 after 13 countries moved their embassies from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, protesting Israel's declaration of the city as its eternal capital. Israel's victory in the 1967 Six-Day War made that possible by uniting Jerusalem. So this is a special year for the feast.
And what's really exciting, it's a Jubilee year for Jerusalem. We're marking 50 years since the city of Jerusalem was reunited back under Jewish sovereignty.
More than half of those celebrating are first-timers.
We're part of a 26-strong Cook Island delegation, and we're here to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, and we're about to be registered as a nation with ICEJ for the first time ever.
Early on this year, God asked me to come to represent the nation of Samoa. So I brought a team of 20 people. So we're here happily from the ends of the earth.
And we ask why they stand strongly with Israel.
It's the biggest proof that God is alive. You have the Jews coming back, you have the land flourishing.
Because the Bible says so.
Israel has given to many nations. It's been a blessing to a lot of nations all over the world. And it's time to pay back.
Jews are the God's chosen nation, and I mean, you don't want to go against God, that's all I can say.
This year's Feast of Tabernacles celebration also marks the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War and the unification of Jerusalem. CBN's docudrama In Our Hands is taking festival goers back in time for that amazing story. Gordon Robertson says, if you don't understand the history, you can't understand today's headlines. And I think that's part of the purpose of In Our Hands, not only to commemorate and celebrate what these soldiers did 50 years ago, but also to help educate and inspire us. In Our Hands, the battle for Jerusalem follows the lives of the paratroopers who captured the Old City and the Temple Mount in 1967.
We are sitting on a ridge overlooking the Old City.
We said this is the proper way to tell the story when it's done with the paratroopers that actually fought for the city, and with actual footage and the reenactments like In Our Hands. It's the perfect narrative, the perfect way to tell the story.
ICEJ Vice President David Parsons says that's why they made the film a central feature of this year's feast.
We're going to have several of the paratroopers that are in the film In Our Hands, Israel Harel and some of the others, on stage to honor them. It's a great moment for us.
Parsons said Christians shouldn't forget the significance of a united Jerusalem.
If the city was still divided like it was for those 19 years of Jordanian occupation, and you came here to visit, you'd have to go through all sorts of checkpoints. It's so wonderful now to be able to come to a united and open, free city, and to celebrate this now, and even the prophetic significance, what it means in God's timetable. It's like Jerusalem is God's timepiece.
Feast participants enjoyed the film.
This film was absolutely spectacular, dramatization, great performances.
It's really touching and help us to love more Israel and the people of this land.
They also received DVDs to take home and spread the word.
I'm even thinking of taking it back home and screening it for my youth and also at the church. But I think this video will have a huge impact.
I really weep in many times when I saw it, and I thought that I really want to bring this film to Finland to see the reality of what happened here in 1967.
It spoke to me, and I will hide this to my heart, and it helps me to pray even more, like we are even urged in the word to pray for Jerusalem and for the peace of Jerusalem.
When we come back, hear from festival goers why they've come from around the world to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, and hear from Israelis who appreciate their love for Israel. Every year at the Feast of Tabernacles, a march is held in Jerusalem, where marchers show their love for Israel. Julie Stahl was in the crowd to hear the passion and support for the Jewish state and its people.
Very, very good. Very good. Chag Sameach.
We are very happy to see them. Yes, very happy.
כל הכבוד להם, הם אנשים מצוינים, בגלל זה אנחנו באנו. לכבד אותם.
We are just standing here with Israel and bless this nation.
We're from Samoa supporting Israel because we love Israel.
I am very touched with how they're supporting Israel. I think it's wonderful.
I enjoy seeing all the foreign nations coming to pay tribute to Jerusalem. That's how much they love us and how much they appreciate us. Now that's great.
Anyone who supports Israel is welcome.
We should be praying for them because that's what the Bible says, for the peace of Israel. I've met Jewish people, I've met Muslims, I've met Christians here. Most people want peace, and they're precious people, and I think we need to show them love and support, but the Jewish people are God's chosen.
Thank you very much. We are thanking on that you come to Israel to visit, and we love to see all the people is come to here and to travel in Jerusalem. It's make me excited.
The Jerusalem March is a highlight not only for Israelis, but for those Christian pilgrims coming from the nations of the world. Maybe you could join them next year in Jerusalem. Well, that's all for this edition. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.